Hello and welcome to the ID Talk podcast. My name is Tony Bitzionis and I'm here with my good pal, Alex Perala. Alex, hello.
Hello.
Today we have a very special guest. We are joined by Ajay Amlani, President and CEO of Aware. AJ, thank you so much for being with us here today. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much, and I appreciate the opportunity, Alex and Tony, to be on your podcast today.
Of course. We
Absolutely.
appreciate you coming on.
Just to get us started, AJ, why don't you just tell us about yourself, about your professional experience, and what brought you to your current position at Aware?
Sure. Um, so prior to being in biometrics and identity technology, I'd worked at sort of a blend of startups and Fortune 500 companies. I actually got my career start when I was 12, and my dad was laid off from a company he'd been working with for 25 years. And then by the time I was 18, we actually put that company that laid him off out of business by taking all their best customers and developing great tech. So
Revenge.
yeah, it was great. It was great. Uh, I kind of fell in love with business. I fell in love with tech. Um, I worked in some Fortune 500 companies, and decision making was but kind of by consensus, and it took a long time to kind of reach major decisions. So I liked the entrepreneurship side of things. I had taken a company public in 2002, post 9/11. We're one of the biggest IPOs of the year, which doesn't say much. And but I wanted to do something for my country ever since watching the events occur at 9/11, and even before that, when I was a kid, wanting to apply for West Point. And so I had this unique opportunity called the White House Fellowship, where I worked for the first Secretary of Homeland Security, Tom Ridge,
Hmm.
and it was a startup within the department, within the federal
Hmm.
government, the first one since DoD. And we acquired 21 different agencies. We started four new agencies, and it was a 180,000 person startup. Shared a cube with four people, and it was the time of my life. It was absolutely the most rewarding job I've ever had, from 5 a.m. until 10 p.m. every day.
Hmm.
One of the biggest drivers of potential opportunity for improving the nation's security infrastructure was the utilization of biometric technology. It was really core to what Secretary Tom Ridge saw as a way to both improve efficiency, improve traveler and customer experience, and secure the infrastructure at very low cost to the taxpayer. And I wasn't a believer, honestly. I first came across kind of the concept of biometrics watching Minority Report in 2002, and it
Right.
freaked me out.
Yeah.
Um, little spiders doing retinal scans.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, the reality of the situation is when we deployed it at airports, we saw travelers that were actually pretty scared of getting interrogated by federal agents. Um, and instead, they put their fingerprints down and they received the words back, "Welcome to the United States."
Hmm.
And this, liberating smile came across their face when I realized it's not just a security technology, it's actually a consumer technology.
Mhm.
So from there, I helped to start Clear. I was one of the founders there. And then worked with airports, worked with consumers, worked with TSA and DHS afterwards to really get that company up off the ground to its first major airport deployments and major partners and investors.
Hmm.
And then since then, I've been working on a lot of different identity technology frameworks, and also had the unique opportunity to go back and serve in the federal government again in 2016 to help start the country's first DoD unit in Silicon Valley, focused on advanced technology
Hmm.
like cybersecurity and AI, autonomous systems and robotics, space tech, and other capabilities around quantum.
It's
Wow.
amazing. You're
Yeah.
a real like OG in the biometrics industry because
Yeah.
that's refreshing. I mean, like it's great to see so many startups like we see now coming into the space and pretty young companies, and we love talking to these folks. But it's also kind of a special treat to talk to someone who's been in this space
Mhm.
since it kind of like I don't know, it was reborn after
Mhm.
9/11. That's also when our platform first launched, when it was
Yeah.
called Find Biometrics. It was also a direct response to everything that was happening. So that's really
I was going to say
interesting.
Really?
you touched on two key parts of our history, and that is the reaction to post 9/11 and a Minority Report
Yeah.
because it comes up so often.
Combination of the two is interesting. I did not know that your podcast actually dates back to that, or your engagement on the press side. I
Yeah. I mean, the
but
podcast itself, to be clear, is maybe 5 or 6 years old, but the
yeah,
actual news platform has been, yeah, it's been around like 24 years at this point, I think.
Mhm.
thank you for continuing to put a flashlight on this subject of identity. It's pretty important. I mean, even earlier on when we thought about identity, um, during the Department of Homeland Security days, we recognized that a lot of the efforts to try to secure identity was really built on a pretty weak foundation to begin with in terms of
Mhm.
um, government issued identity. I mean, when you're born, your first identity document is a birth certificate, and from there you're issued a social security number. But it's really not until you either receive a passport or a driver's license or a state ID card that you actually are appended a biometric onto your identity. And so it provides, even from the ground up, right, a pretty weak infrastructure to try to basically build and architect a solid um, identity infrastructure here in the United States. Other countries like India and LATAM countries have established national ID programs, understood the importance of biometrics in that. And the United States, for a variety of reasons, hasn't been able to actually have that kind of infrastructure built, which leads us down a path where we're really trying to build as much infrastructure as possible, but yet off of a pretty unstable foundation.
Yeah, and it's also like it's so complicated and there's lots of different interests that need to be balanced, and that's I mean that's for us part of our platform is just trying to cover things accurately, make sure people are understanding things clearly, and
Yeah,
like getting through the noise of various you know lobby type groups or various advocates who are pushing some particular ideology or point of view. um,
yeah.
so yeah, it's a tricky space, but enough about us. I actually wanted to ask you kind of a broad question, just like thank you for that history. It's really I kind of want to get back into some of the stuff you mentioned from your professional history, but just leading up to now you're at Aware. It's kind of a broad question, but I am curious. You're coming to this organization. I don't believe you have worked with Aware before, and it's decades old. It has a huge IP portfolio. It's like a big name. What is it like to just step into this role, just like an outsider coming in and having to lead this huge organization? What is that like?
Yeah, it's actually it's really exciting. I mean, I chased Aware for a little while, to be honest with you, because I did know of Aware back in the original days of the Department of Homeland Security when we first were looking at vendors that really had great technology and capabilities and teams that could help to secure our infrastructure. And Aware was one of the companies that really we sought out to deploy some of our nation's most important identity systems.
Hmm.
Um, and so it was interesting to me when after pursuing the DoD initiative and getting back into the world of identity in 2016, to really look at trying to modernize it with mobile driver's licenses. I worked with Apple, Google, Samsung, major states, to try to look at how to deploy mobile driver's licenses across the whole country in 2016, because that was still kind of the de facto national program for identity. I realized very quickly that biometrics were a critical component to that now in a digital future, and it presented a really unique opportunity in that everyone now carries around biometric reader devices in their pockets.
Hmm.
And it provided a leapfrog opportunity for the industry, and that I knew the time would come. So it started kind of a side business that ended up getting acqui-hired by Academia to try to launch around mobile driver's licenses and connections into states. and started launching some of that work. Um, I mean, I'd worked at a couple other biometrics companies and also within PayPal and DocuSign on biometrics in particular. And so I knew of Aware. I was surprised that Aware was still in the market and hadn't necessarily received the kind of funding that a lot of other companies in the space had. It's still obviously a large company, but there were many companies in the space that were raising hundreds of millions of dollars from venture capital investors, especially during COVID when the world had gone remote, that leveraged biometrics as part of their solution. And I had helped the VCs, the venture capital firms out here in the Valley, and some of those companies specifically because I was asked to by the investors to scale and to grow and to find use cases and partner up with large companies. But Aware wasn't there. They weren't in the consideration set for a lot of the companies that were looking at procuring these next generation biometric solutions, and I found that very surprising. And so I reached out to Aware last year and inquired as to why they weren't in that conversation, and didn't really get a clear answer as to why.
Mm.
Um, and it was curious. I was just curious about it. And then when the former CEO decided to leave, I thought that was a unique opportunity to be able to um, speak to the company and speak to the board and get to know the technology a lot more and get to know the team. And I realized that there's a real unique opportunity here to be able to scale what I think is a, a pretty powerful, phenomenal company with a history that goes back almost 40 years in biometrics.
That's really interesting. And for whatever reason, not what I was expecting to hear. I don't know what I was expecting, but that's just a really interesting story. Something that we tend to ask our guests pretty often because of just the climate of the industry right now has to do with how you're preparing for or how you're handling the like ever evolving threats posed by AI and other advanced attacks. And I'd be curious to hear your take just because it's not often that we get to talk to somebody like yourself who's in charge of a large, well-established company with, a large IP portfolio and resources. So I just love to hear your take on how you see this ever evolving threat and what it's like. I don't know if keeping up with it is the correct term or just adapting with it would be more accurate.
Yeah, it's a great question. It's a really important and timely question. Back in 2016, when I was helping the DoD to start the unit that we started, I started to learn about um, major uh, adversarial efforts to undermine our country's digital infrastructure. And honestly, it just terrified me. I couldn't believe that these countries were actually employing their nation's best engineering teams on fighting digital war against the United States when the United States' best engineers were working on targeting advertisements better to customers online.
Mhm.
And it scared the, what out of me. Um, and these tools and these capabilities that they were developing were very advanced. And fortunately, we do and have had a significant amount of investment in our cyber infrastructure since then. But the democratization of these really sophisticated tools that were developed by adversarial countries are now in the hands of attackers in hoodies, and the less sophisticated folks who now can become very sophisticated quickly, and they can actually contribute themselves to these attack vectors and tools in a collective fashion using all kinds of different communications capabilities, not just on the dark web, but like Slack,
Mhm.
right? I mean, they're literally subscribing to these different collaboration tools to work together on a global basis to attack some of our critical infrastructure. And the ways that they're getting through and penetrating are very much focused on the sort of confiscation of credentials. And basically identity.
Mhm.
They're impersonating somebody else. The password infrastructure here in the United States is very weak. It's kind of ridiculous the way that we have to change passwords now to just crazy symbols and numbers, and we're expecting everybody to remember these, as we are also expecting everybody to have different passwords for every single digital application that they use, sometimes up to 50.
Mhm. Yeah.
And the safest spot to be able to store these passwords, I discovered from our nation's most sophisticated um, cybersecurity experts that I worked with in the DoD, the best place to store these were in a physical book. Just write them down
Mhm.
with pencil and erase them when you change it. It's like, how is that possible? They're like, well, if you store it anywhere digitally, someone in an adversarial country can actually get it. They don't have to travel here. They don't have to break into your house. They can just basically
Right.
access it anytime that they want. And with the right resources and effort, they'll be able to do this. Whereas if you just store it inside of a book, it's like a physical place. Um, People break into your house to steal jewelry. They don't really steal into your house, break into your house to try to find a book of passwords,
Mhm.
um, especially if they're in an adversarial country. And so I was blown away by this. Um, and I'm like, God, there's got to be something to do. And if you think about identity at its core, you've got sort of three factors of identity. Everybody talks about multi-factor authentication, but they don't really ask themselves the questions like, what does that mean to have multiple factors? Well, factor one, historically in the evolution of that term, has always been something and that could be a username and password, that could be a mother's maiden name, that could be a social security number or a phone number, that could be a home address. Um, and that's had to get harder and harder over time because of the fact that all this information is now available online in the dark web.
Mhm.
Uh, your passwords are getting stolen. Legitimate companies out there are actually paying dark web attackers for those passwords, and you're like, why are you paying them for these passwords? They're like, well, listen, I want to make sure they're not using a password that's been stolen already, because otherwise, you know, their account is at risk, and I'm going to force a password reset. I'm like, but you're funding the adversaries. How does that make sense? Um, they're like, yeah, but I just care about my own infrastructure.
Mhm.
Like I care about my, you know, my enterprise. Uh,
Wow.
and so as this world has gotten really difficult about around this first factor, all of the companies that operate in this space of like what you know about the customer, and those are basically, the big ID bureaus that basically are just collections of all of this data on customers that they've procured over the course of time through God knows what um, process to keep a creepy, database of data on individuals, which then they can use to somehow secretly identify those individuals, with home loans and home loan sizes and car loan sizes and past addresses and other things like that. Well, now the pass rates on factor one for AI bots has far surpassed the pass rates that humans have on their own identity.
Mhm.
Remembering this kind of data from years ago is very difficult for a human to do. Similar to kind of like a CAPTCHA. Like a CAPTCHA sometimes has gotten so hard now for a human to pass, but it's actually much easier for an AI bot to pass
Mhm.
that's trained. And
I can
so
attest to that just as an
I
aside.
suck. I suck so bad at captures now. I'm so glad you said that.
it's it's hard. And so especially on a phone, right? Which is like a form factor, which is not conducive
Mhm.
to trying to solve complex puzzles on, unless you're doing a Wordle, which by the way, 2 days ago, the Wordle was aware. I don't know if you guys paid attention to that,
Oh
but the
no.
it was aware, which I thought was awesome.
Good marketing.
Yeah. And so
Yeah.
factor two is what you carry, right? And that's a driver's license, which is now actually just available for basically $35 for one that you can use to pass a TSA checkpoint. And it's crazy to think that we're trying to basically secure our nation's infrastructure off of any kind of a physical laminated document, even with what they call embedded security features, which are really just holograms. Sometimes that'll pop up with certain kinds of ultraviolet light and sometimes won't. But there's a recipe for all of these things, and our, our nation's adversaries have those recipes, and hopefully they're only selling it to, let's say an 18-year-old in a dorm room that wants to go out and buy beer and look cool. Many times that's not who they're selling it to.
Mm.
Right.
And we're also trying to now move towards a mobile driver's license world, or even use phone number and SIM card as a unique identifier. But in an AI world, the ability to mimic a human is actually getting easier and easier. I'm not sure if you guys tracked the launch of World ID and
Yep.
the company Tools for Humanity.
Yep.
Um, so I got a special invitation to the launch uh, from Sam Altman and Alex Blanet. The the system that they're starting, I found it really fascinating. First of all, at a top line, which is Sam Altman is starting two companies. One, which is really to be able to create the ability for AI to become as human-like as possible. And
Mm.
then the foresight that he had, which is amazing to think, oh my God, I have a responsibility to now actually start a company to verify humanness. Because at the
Mhm.
end of the day, we need to have humanness inside of a digital ecosystem, um, to bring that personal nature and to allow this to work effectively. So you need to have the ability to use biometrics to verify humanness. And hence he launched this company, um, and has now launched it in the US, uh, with a team of people that are some of the best sort of scientists in the world and the best engineering teams in the world.
Mm.
um, that get that obviously with a name like Sam Altman and Alex and the group are being attracted to this idea that you can actually secure the nation's infrastructure and the worldwide infrastructure around identity. And there wasn't ever identity built into the original concepts of the internet. So how do you now solve that? And it's a variety of different approaches. And I think when you get really good, smart people in a room with enough investor money, most of the times you'll figure out something worthwhile. And so, it's a really interesting thing to think about biometrics, which is the third factor,
Mhm.
as the mechanism now, and that journey, that people have taken now. I've kind of been, there's lots of people in this industry like you and I that have been like, why is it taking so long to get here? Right? We've been in this for 20 years. We've kind of already reached that conclusion 20 years ago that it was like the best way to secure privacy and security and customer convenience was through biometrics. So the question is like, why has it taken so long for the world to realize this? Right? Why have we created this like crazy patchwork of different identity systems and data players and everything else like that to kind of act like we're guessing, like provide more probability when we guess at somebody's identity, when we have tools in place that can actually verify somebody's identity, like biometrics.
Yeah, there's always been, at least since I've been covering this space, this kind of like tension between a reluctance among like mainstream, I'll say consumers, uh, and then the actual effectiveness and convenience that the technology actually offers. And I feel like it's interesting that you mention World ID because I think it's not like we're a super interesting company. It's not clear to me yet how they're going to fit into the overall landscape, but I think you're right that they're bringing a lot of attention to it, and it could end up being similar to, for example, Touch ID on the iPhone. I think that went a long way to popularizing biometric authentication. These kind of big splashy flagship
Mhm.
new solutions can really like warm people up to these ideas, I feel like.
Yeah, and even if you look at the history of Touch ID, you go back to companies like UPEC and Authentic,
Mhm.
right? Who had been doing like swipe sensors and capacitive sensors for a long time on mobile devices and were integrated with phones coming out of Japan. Um, and but when Apple stepped in with their money and their prowess and said, listen, this is actually a real thing for us now to be able to allow for it to happen on a phone, and the customer started understanding the convenience of a Touch ID, um, it lit the industry up, right? Like
Mhm.
UPEC was acquired by Authentic, and then Authentic was then turned around and acquired by Apple. All their intellectual property found to be extremely important. for Apple to have and to own themselves as they launch this capability, because Apple themselves is they're the most sued company on earth, right? Most of their IP efforts and most of the investment in the patents that they do are actually more for a defensive posture to make sure that they can defend themselves against um, all the lawsuits that come their way.
Mm.
And to think about that and the foresight of it to make that acquisition back when they did was really interesting. And then the continued evolution to then move into Face ID and the evolution of that, which has now been, I think, a 180-degree change in the consumer perception of face biometrics. Consumers were going back to Minority Report in 2002. There's always been like a relatively skeptical nature from many consumers
Mm.
around the utilization of biometrics. But when they start realizing that it's much more secure and it's much more convenient to just Face ID now up to 15 or 20 times a day when they're logging into their phones or logging into apps on their phone or logging into capabilities, instead of typing in, I mean, it's really hard to type in username and password on a screen. And there's a lot of efforts being done, let's say by organizations like Fido to create, passwordless capabilities and passkeys. But garbage in, garbage out, right? Like if you're not biometrically
Mhm.
locking down the passkey in the first place, and the reissuance process now opens up another attack vector to allow bad actors to now gain access to a passkey and navigate through an organization on their own because it's not anchored with the biometric in the first place. Um, provides a really astounding, dangerous threat to organizations that aren't recognizing that you need to anchor it with the biometrics so that when anytime that you have to reset it, you use a biometric to verify the person is who they say they are.
Mhm.
It's that foundational identity layer that is really important that you can build off of. Going back to like, our work trying to even finally get, you can't understand how happy I am to finally have Real ID, which is I wrote stuff in the Real ID Act, right? To actually now be implemented, and at least it's at airports. Right.
Yeah.
It's like, God,
Congratulations.
thank you. 20 years later, it's like, wow. Yeah, it's
That's
hilarious.
sometimes that's the pace of progress. But
Yeah.
but on that government note, going back to your background, I might be going a little bit into not conspiracy mode, but I have kind of I want the inside info in as much as you can provide it. You mentioned that you started this like um government initiative in Silicon Valley in 2016. Is that right?
Yeah, it was a defense unit that was I wasn't the only founder. There was a team of 10 of us,
Right.
and we formed out of Moffett Field, which was an abandoned Navy base, now taken over by NASA, uh, the DoD's first ever unit in Silicon Valley to work with the talented engineers uh, that we actually do produce here in the United States, and have access to here in the United States to give them something to do other than target advertisements to people online.
Right. So
That's
so with that, that's so interesting. When it was started, and maybe even like now, I'm just curious, like, did the DoD do they have their own like or sorry, was it DHS?
no DoD. DoD.
Did, okay.
That was DoD 2003 to 2004, like the startup of DHS. That's way back when.
Okay.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
the DoD, do they have like really sophisticated authentication tech that they have in-house that is secret, and they go and talk to Silicon Valley people and are like, what do you have that we don't? Or is it like they really just are starting from scratch and reaching out to Silicon Valley and being like, please help us with this because we don't have anything.
Yeah, so the unit's name is actually Defense Innovation Unit, and it was originally called DIUX, Defense Innovation Unit Experimental. And we started it up with multiple portfolios of almost thinking about it like a venture capital firm would, where we had specific areas that we consider to be third offset. So you think about the offsets that we've used to protect our country over time. Um, you know, there's been things that we've been able to have a differentiated advantage of versus our near peer adversaries over time. First was sort of like air power, then came nuclear power, and thinking about the next generation offset in cybersecurity, in AI technology, and all of these other capabilities. Cybersecurity was one portfolio within that defense innovation unit, and still is today. Um, and cybersecurity, though, it's really funny because most people think of cybersecurity and they're like, okay, well, how do I respond to an incident? Or potentially how do I keep people out of my infrastructure in a more in easier fashion? But when your foundational identity layer for the DoD is a CAC card, a common access card, and you're building everything off of a common access card, it doesn't allow you to really have a lot of flexibility. So moving that into a digital age to allow people to be able to access information real time on the fly, potentially in network denied environments, becomes a huge challenge for our DoD. And there's a variety of different patches and band-aids that have been added onto that infrastructure, but they still have not addressed the fundamental foundational nature of a digital identity for DoD. And the CAT card itself, while a very useful and important tool, sticking a card into a phone is not an easy thing to do to log in.
Mhm.
And you need the wonderful world word dongle sometimes, which people have to carry around with them to like literally authenticate and sign documents tied to a computer. Um, can't even tap it, right? It's not even like a NFC chip on a credit card. Um, and so these are huge challenges that the DoD is trying to face around identity. And we're in conversations with those agencies right now, here to where to think about what are those different elements and capabilities that we can work with the teams who are hungry for this change. Our government, imagine being a government employee, not even today, like today it's a whole nother interesting place to be with all the efforts and changes happening. But before then, you felt like you were getting sucked back in a time warp when you step into your job. When you order a pizza or a burrito, you know that it's around the corner. When you order aircraft parts, you don't know what state they're in.
Mhm.
And that type of real-time information that people have when they go home isn't available to them when they step into the Pentagon. And that's because of all these like archaic contracting models that we have in the Beltway bandits that have really just been like surrounding the government, acting like they're actually the best in class technology, when in reality, nobody graduating out of MIT or Carnegie Mellon or University of Michigan, because I'm going to throw them in there as one of our nation's best universities because I went there, um, will really considers the government or a government contractor as really a desirable place to work. They all want to go to Sam Altman,
Mhm.
right? And so how do you attract that talent to work on our nation's hardest problems? Like the one classic example I give is the company Neuro. Neuro is delivering pizzas for Domino's and groceries for Kroger. I invested in Neuro when I was at Kroger to do autonomous vehicle deliveries. Well, their teams got started with the DARPA Grand Challenge. So it was a DoD funded initiative originally back in 2007, 2008 around autonomous vehicles and granting winners. But we never kept them on contract. We never kept them working to deliver plasma into war-torn battlefields, to evacuate wounded, right? To save human lives. So they're delivering pizzas, right? And like it's
Wow.
great that Domino's gets to deliver pizzas autonomously and the cost of a driver they can save by having a neuro vehicle. But what about our country? What about our warfighters that are risking their lives every day? What about the people that are
Mhm.
affected by these wars that can't get access to common basic goods? That's where autonomous vehicles should be working. And so there's been a huge effort. by our DoD over years to invest in Defense Innovation Unit and the funding and the contract vehicles to engage next generation companies and engineers on these problems. And that's what Aware is really well positioned to do, right? Like our background goes back to MIT scientists that were actually hired by the FBI originally to create a common standard called WSQ for fingerprint submissions for background checks in the 80s.
Mhm.
And um, we have access to some of the best engineering teams in the world to help to solve these identity challenges for the federal government and also for commercial companies.
Yeah. So you're like, pizza delivery is solved. Let's
Yeah, we
let's
can
tackle
move on.
something a bit more serious.
Checked. Yeah, like exactly.
Yeah. Plus, the Domino's closest to me is a block away. I can't even order delivery without feeling terrible about myself, so it's of no use to me. Let's put that technology to better use. Uh, AJ, this is amazing. I mean, I feel like Alex and I could probably easily talk to you for an hour, another hour. But we're almost running out of time. But I do, before we let you go, I do want to just ask you generally what's next for Aware? What's going on for the remainder of this year? What are you guys looking forward to most? What are you personally looking forward to most? What's on the docket?
Yeah, so I think first off, in the government, there's been a lot of interesting changes, as you guys have been reading about, and a lot of it's driven by a desire for better government efficiency, which has always been needed, honestly. And I think everybody in the country that has served in the government will tell you first, like, yes, we definitely need more government efficiency, and there needs to be big concerted efforts. Well, it's definitely changed the landscape for government contracts, and a lot of the contracts have been getting canceled on these legacy contracts for delivering next generation identity systems uh, that had a set of requirements written in 2012 that have a targeted delivery date of 2028 and have been charging governments like 500 million to $1 billion to try to deploy. Um, by the time that it's 2028 and you're delivering the product off of requirements that were set in 2012, it's already 16 years outdated. You need to create better models to be able to more cost effectively serve the employees and the taxpayer with better systems from the ground up. So this is a really unique opportunity for us in the government sector to step in and be able to help solve and alleviate some of the problems and um, not be locked out by entrenched uh, providers trying to protect government contracts. So I think that there's a lot of opportunity there on the government side. On the commercial side, many of the companies have migrated to biometrics really through what I call a gateway of identity verification, which has been much more identity document validation, that the document is actually a real and not tampered with identity, which honestly, on the back the camera of a phone, how good can you actually be in verifying that that document is in fact real? You can guess, so maybe you can get really good at guessing using AI, but you're not verifying the document hasn't been tampered with. And then you're adding a selfie check, just similar to the way that any humans today always identify people is actually just by looking at someone and matching up either against an ID or you already know the person from before and you're just basically now recognizing the person by face. Well, moving that now, they're recognizing the power of biometrics, especially with consumers asking for it all the time, and moving towards identity systems that are actually based on biometrics. So on the commercial side, we're seeing a huge amount of activity from the nations and the world's largest companies looking to try to anchor on a biometric backend to be able to create that kind of customer convenience and security at the same time. So it's a really exciting time right now for the biometric industry. And Aware is really well positioned with its constant focus on the science of biometrics at scale, its proven delivery of being able to solve some of the government's biggest problems and being the go-to called upon company to do it. And we're engaging in different partnerships as well to make sure that our customers are able to get best-in-class technology across the board, whether it's built by Aware or it's integrated into Aware. And it's a pretty exciting time to be able to have these conversations with customers as they're looking to try to deploy biometrics at scale.
Yeah, we're looking forward to seeing where you go from here. I mean, I can feel the energy that
Yeah.
you're bringing to this. So yeah, I'm excited to see what your team does.
That's great. Well, thank you so much for your time. This has been an incredible opportunity to meet a couple people that are um, have been so passionate about this for decades,
Uh,
and it's been a great opportunity for me to get to know you, and I look forward to staying in touch and potentially meeting up at some point in time in the future.
yeah, definitely. And thank you.
Yep.
It's like I said before, talking to a biometrics OG is
Yeah.
always fascinating. Really, really interesting background and insight. Really appreciate your time.
Thank you.